It's time for another North Carolina Tar Heels basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is our director of basketball recruiting, longtime college AAU and high school coach, Mr. David Sisk. And David, we haven't done a straight Tar Heels basketball podcast for a while. So we were talking this week about doing a couple of things, and this is a topic you wanted to hit on. And we haven't gotten your take on the transfers in some time. So with basketball practice starting in a couple of weeks, and recently a lot of sites and people that cover college basketball for a living have put out a lot of transfer class rankings. And generally North Carolina is in the 7 to 12 range. They may have been a little bit higher in one ranking, but I don't recall exactly. It's been a mishmash between about 7 and 9. Field of 68, I think, had them at 9. So we thought we would approach this subject and just kind of go from there. And now that you've had a chance to allow this class to settle in, kind of get your take on what this class is all about. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Before we do, real quickly, just a reminder, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp, we'll have an ad for them coming up a little bit later in this show. So David, the rankings, I'm going to stick at 9 because I think that's sort of the average. Do you think
Good
9? Yeah, why not? Ted Williams, right? And Stan Musial, I think, was number 9, maybe? Or no, he was 6, my dad's favorite player. So we'll stick with Ted Williams. I'm really dating myself here. So
Joe Burrow.
Yeah, there you go, Joe Burrow. So there's more modern stuff there. And by the way, before we get into it, you can actually wear number 9 in college basketball now. Do you think that's a good thing? They do it in the NBA. They've been doing it for a long time, but you can have number 7. You can have number 8.
I've always wondered if you're just a prestigious, historic program, organization, your North Carolina Celtics, eventually you're going to run out of numbers.
Yeah.
Because you're retiring all these numbers up, got them up the bleachers. So, yeah, why not open it up? I always thought it was the reason I reffed a little bit of middle school basketball and all that out of high school, try to, have some spending money. And the reason, they didn't go over 5, they wanted to be able to report the fouls or whatever on one hand.
Yeah.
So, why not go over?
Yeah.
I mean, God gave you 2 hands. Why can't you, anywhere between 1 to 99?
I remember seeing George Mirasan play with the Bullets, number 77, and he committed a foul about every 19 seconds. The refs had no problem communicating 7-7 to the official score. So, so topic at hand, the transfer class. 9, you think that's about right for North Carolina?
Yeah. I think it's tough, really. I wonder, the way basketball and football and everything's changed. And I thank God that I'm not a national recruiting guy and I have to rank players and classes because that's you can't win, dude. It's tough. I no way. People ask me about this player, where would you rank them? If this player reclasses, where would you rank them? And I got no idea. I don't do that. I don't want to do that. And now you bring in transfers. It's even tougher because some have played at smaller schools and they've been successful. How does a guy leaving Townsend or wherever, how does he correlate to playing in the ACC?
Yeah.
And then, some people, they just need a clean slate. I think we all agree Caleb Love needed to start over.
Yeah.
And so, will Caleb Love somewhere else at Arizona was better than what he was at North Carolina? Will Harrison Ingram at North Carolina be better than he was at Stanford? So that's another thing. And then when you have your overall classes, how do you rank a class? You put the high school recruiting class, the class that we've always had historically, and then add a transfer class to it. So, man, you've got a lot of variables in there. If you think it's tough for us to pick them and hit and miss, you can imagine if you're a coach. So,
and some of the other Yeah, and David, some of the other things that I get, and when I read these, I think most of the rankings were just based on straight talent pool. Whatever the guys were, if you brought in 3 or 4, how good are they? How good have they been? And that's pretty much what the ranking is. But I think that something like transfer portal, if you're going to do a ranking, it's very difficult to do because you really have to know the returning rosters of every team they're going to and rank it based on need and how many needs do they fill. And I think the group that Hubert brought in fills a lot of needs. And I also think what it does is it's a shift into the next phase of Hubert at North Carolina because they're going to play a different approach. If they don't, then there's going to be a lot of trouble there because I don't think you can try to play the way they did a year ago with this roster and be successful. You can play the way Hubert has said multiple times, the way he wants to play. You can do that with this roster, in part because of the guys he brought in from the portal and has some success, which is why I think as the season gets closer, a lot of North Carolina fans have increasing optimism because they start envisioning these parts kind of meshing well together with the primary component being able to hit outside shots as opposed to last year when they didn't, and how that relates to everything else in the court and certainly opens up things for Armando Bacot, who will finally play his last year in Chapel Hill.
Well, before we come on here, I told you my take on all this is it's not the traditional 4-year deal anymore. I look at this just like the NBA. And these guys are basically under 1-year contracts.
Yeah.
And, what if one guy doesn't work, I'm not going to say the coach ushers them out the door, but, it makes it much easier to recruit over in portal. So, I think players too kind of see handwritings on the wall or maybe like I said, they want to go where the grass is greener maybe. But in the NBA, you've always had your 3, 4, 5 top players. And then from there in free agency, almost every year, you have to go in and add pieces. And I always look at the best teams. You had an idea who they were. What kind of pieces did they go out and add? I've done that for years. I remember when I was a kid and the Celtics back in the 80s, I was always looking, who did the Celtics pick up that might not be a star? But who did the 76ers pick up? Who did the Lakers pick up? And that's what I kind of looked at. So, when Gerald Henderson left, who did they get? Well, Scott Webb. And, we talked about the Bulls. You had Jordan and you had Pippen. What did he put around him? You talk about the centers. They went from Bill Cartwright to Scott Williams to Vanderbilt.
Will Purdue
to Luke Longley.
Yeah.
They went across and, they bring in Ron Harper. And, Ron Harper, I remember when I was a kid, he was at Cleveland, and people don't want to go back and hear all his history. But, when he was at Cleveland, he was one of the best players in the league. Well, he got a little older, got up his 30s, and the Bulls picked him up, and he was still a very, very good player, but he wasn't a star anymore. And I think if you look at North Carolina, they've kind of done that. Man, they had a lot of players leave. They had a lot of players come in. And I think what he did, just by looking at what left and what came in, I think Hubert, like you said, was looking more for a fit. I think he was looking more, it's an older group. It's a more experienced group. Basketball IQ is probably better, and they appear to be better shooters. Yeah. And I just feel like what North Carolina has, I think their big 3 is going to be Cadeau, is going to be R.J. Davis, and is going to be Armando Bacot. So what do they bring in to really help them and to allow them to play their games and complement them, as I guess is the word that I'm thinking of. And I think that what they've got this year probably complements better than what they had.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's say that it's Cadeau, RJ, and Armando. And I think RJ is going to have a fantastic year. Armando's going to have a very good year as well. And I will reiterate again, as I have numerous times on some of these shows over the last couple of months, Armando did improve between his junior year and last year. He showed it early. Go back and watch the game against Ohio State. Watch him against Hunter Dickinson. He ate Hunter Dickinson alive in Charlotte. What happened is when opponents started doubling him and sometimes even dropping a third guy, and they knew what the Tar Heels were going to run, they started snuffing out the sets, everything came to a halt. What Hubert brought in, if we're talking Elliot Cadeau, RJ Davis, and Armando Bacot as being the three main cogs, he brought in guys that can complement those kinds of players. Cormac Ryan, a shooter who has been on the ball in shot clock situations, been on the ball a lot, so he's got awareness. He can handle. He plays with his head up, okay? And he can make stuff happen, and he can shoot. When you look at Paxson Wojcik's a guy that plays with his head up. He had quite a few 4 and 5 assist games at Brown on a team where he had to take a lot of big shots. So there was a lot of unselfishness there. There was a lot of connecting with other guys on the floor. Harrison Ingram had to run the point a lot for Stanford. So there's another guy who played with his head up, who got other people involved. So those three guys on the floor, I think, are going to mesh with whatever Hubert wants to do. And then you get other complementary guys, and Jae'Lyn Withers, who I think can be a really nice player for this team, a phenomenal baseline player, and he gives them some athleticism that they need. And then, of course, Okonkwo filling in, playing behind Armando, and they're probably going to get 3 years out of him. So I like the way these guys make the whole a lot better because they fit and they're not going to get in the way. And I'm not being critical of Pete Nance, but Pete Nance appeared to get in the way a lot last year, to stagnate things. The group they're going to roll out on the floor against Radford, that starting lineup, they should not get in the way of each other. They should be able to flow and have a little symmetry out there on the court.
Now, against, I think, Radford and some of those teams. Now, one thing I have to say about North Carolina, anybody who thinks that, they dodge a tough schedule, they need help, okay? I'm looking at the schedule like last year, and it's unbelievable. It's not like they play many low majors and mid majors. The kind of bit, I mean, they step right into it right off the bat. So, you go from Radford, you go in, you really get into it. So, early on against the Radford, I would think they would be able to run a little bit more. And if you look the last couple of years, they start out, they might play a low major or mid major, and they score up in the 90s, and you think, man, this team's really going to be high octane. And the next thing you know, you get into February and they're bogged down, and they got every game looks like they're in the 40s and 50s. And so one thing that we had last year, we thought, and you've said this, the North Carolina State game for one in Raleigh was frustrating because you could obviously hear Hubert Davis calling out sets when they wanted to run to slow it down. I know you mentioned that. So, I think he realizes, and I've given him credit for this, what he did. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting the same results. And he's obviously in his roster gotten away from it. A totally different looking team. Not as athletic, more skilled, more experienced, better shooters. I think that they're going to push the ball more. They've got to push the ball more of Cadeau. You've got one of the best, I'm telling you now, one of the best open court passers you are ever going to see. So you've got him. So you're looking ahead there to throw ahead. I think they got guys that got to get out and run. I think they'll do that a little bit to loosen it up. But the big thing in half court is you've got to be able to stretch it. I don't care how good you pass the ball. I don't care how smart you are. You can have the greatest plays ever. If you can't shoot the ball, they're going to pack it in. Then your guards can't drive. They can't get the ball. And listen, the damage that they did, well, they caught a lot of teams' defensive was before he ever caught it. They've got help. They're just decided there's one or two guys out there they're not going to guard. And they're just going to play back the passing lane. They're going to double. You can't pass from a wing. You can't even high-low it because they're in. You make a couple of shots, you stretch them out, and then I really think the game's on. So he's brought in those kind of guys that can make shots. And I think that's big. I think if you're North Carolina, you'll trade a little bit of athleticism they might have had in the past to bring in more skilled guys because you've got players around them, like RJ, like Elliott, like Amanda Baycott, who can flourish, who can carry a team, with the right kind of guys around heavy.
Well, the ball moves quicker than the feet. And I think when you have multiple shooters out there and you spot them up on both wings, I have a sense this is going to be a good ball reversal team. You can't reverse the ball effectively if one of the guys is not respected. It doesn't have to be guarded. It's not a true ball reversal. I think you're going to see a lot of that with this club. Before we get into a little bit more, and I want to ask you about captains, and I want to ask you a little bit more about what response of Hubert's to a question in a press conference when we had him about 7 weeks ago. But before we do that, let's go ahead and hear a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. So whether it's dealing with, decisions around your career, maybe your relationship or anything else, whatever it may be, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life so you can move forward with confidence and excitement and trusting yourself to make these decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the better and easier it gets. I know for me sometimes, as somebody who uses therapy, that sometimes talking things through with someone is just incredibly helpful, and we can all get in our own heads a little bit too much sometimes, and getting out of that by getting feedback from a licensed and trained professional can bring a ton of clarity to your life. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, guys, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule, which is just so huge in my opinion, because convenience is just so big in today's world. And with BetterHelp, you can do everything online. So let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/THI to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's betterhelp.com/THI to get 10% off your first month. Links in the description below. Back to the show.
Okay, 2 more things I want to hit on with you, David. I'm going to save the captain thing for last. When we were in a press conference, a summer presser with Hubert about 7 weeks ago, he was asked, what you brought in from the portal, are we to believe that that's kind of your vision and how you want to play moving forward? Hubert is often not going to respond definitively to certain things. He could be definitive, but maybe not to the premise of the question. And he didn't say yes, but he said yes. And I think this is the next step in what he wants. He wants those guys that could play sort of the way he did. And it's not because he played that way. I think Hubert Davis would be, as a college player, would be a perfect fit on this team because of the ability to hit the outside shot, because of the ability to use different angles and lanes and use floor and help and make other guys better because of his existence on the court. But I do think that's what he wants moving forward, and perhaps even a 5 that can step out. We've seen Armando shooting a lot of stuff out in LA, perimeter shots, and I think that's more getting him ready for what he's going to do in April after the college season ends so he can prepare for the next level. But nevertheless, if he's able to step out every once in a while, it has to be respected. That opens up even more stuff. So your thoughts about Hubert's response, that I think in a roundabout way he said yes, that is the vision of the future.
I think Hubert's really response, just as far from deeds and not words, I think is really short term, because he had to fit through the portal around the stars that he had. And we've already made that point. And as you look on down the road long term, he's not offered these kind of guys in high school. Now, by looking at it, he may be saying that, yes, I'm going to use the portal to fit need. And that's what he did. It's what he did with Manic. It's what we thought he did with Nance. And, so they needed a 4. And that's what they went into, to kind of equip themselves through the portal. This year, we're going to talk about what they needed. They needed shooters. They needed better basketball IQ. They needed more experience. He got that. But when I look at him going to the high school, I see him getting more and more and more selective through high school recruiting. You know, when he first got here, you look at that first full class that he had, and those guys weren't 5-stars, and some of those guys down were in the 70s and 80s. I go into 2025, and everybody that he has offered is in the top 20. He's offered nothing but 5-stars, man. I mean, he's choosing and selecting. He's not recruiting them. So, he's after those best players, whether it's Koa Pete, whether it's Boozer, whether it's Bryson Tiller, whether it's Caleb Wilson, Darren Peterson. You go down a list of top 10 players, top 20 players, and 5-stars, and North Carolina is offered. And then you get on out of that, you look on down, and even some kids that are in state that are top 30, top 40, and we're saying, well, I think North Carolina will probably offer. They have it. Now, Drake Powell was one of those guys. I think he did a great job. He saw what Drake Powell was going to be. Drake Powell may end up being ranked higher than Ian Jackson. I think he's a top 10 player in the country. So it just looks to me like, they're starting to stockpile out of high school. They're looking at these 5-star players. And the guys that they brought in the transfer portal are not 5-star players, with the exception of Harrison Ingram coming out of high school. But the rest of them are shooters and are skilled. And I would be surprised if a player like Hubert Davis, as a coach, wouldn't want a team that could shoot. That would surprise me. That would be like Steph Curry coaching the team and getting a gang that couldn't shoot straight, just getting a bunch of bricklayers out there on the perimeter. It wouldn't make any sense at all. It wouldn't make sense of Hubert Davis. I think he wants shooters, but I wonder too, when he says yes, if he's not just looking to add pieces around the portal. That may be what he's saying yes to. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and I was thinking more in terms of just spacing and wanting angles and lanes and allowing for a lot more fluidity. Final question for you. I did something about a month ago. I think I did a pod and maybe have written something as well. This time of year, the content just kind of runs together, especially when you're in the football cave. But I think what's very interesting, and this is a product of the portal era and getting that extra year that some guys can still take advantage of because of COVID. They're going to have 5 guys on the roster this season that were captains of college teams last year. 3 of them came in from the portal. RJ and Armando were captains. They brought in Paxson Wojcik. He was a captain at Brown. Jae'Lyn Withers was a captain at Louisville, and Cormac Ryan was a captain at Notre Dame. What do you think about the fact they're going to have 5 dudes on the roster that are going to play that were captains in college last year?
Well, I like that. And it's older and experienced also. We're doing this on a Tuesday night. If you watch Duke and Clemson last night, they were talking about, I think it was Duke, that had a player in his 7th year.
Yeah.
And I and you go back to Georgia, Stetson Bennett was 25 years old, as a starter at Georgia last year. I think there were 8 starting quarterbacks in the NFL that were younger than him. And
North Carolina's starting center in football, Corey Gaynor, is 25. He's in his 7th year.
You're talking about Justin Herbert and all those guys. They're younger than Stetson Bennett. So I like it because I know this. If a coach has to constantly coach camaraderie and effort and maturity in a locker room, that team will not prosper. Okay, those are stuff that has to be taken care of in the locker room among players. Coach shouldn't have to deal with that. If you spend your time coaching that, it takes away from the important things that you need to coach. So I really feel like that's big. You bring in captains. You're bringing in guys who are responsible. And you've got guys that have been around the game. Paxson Wojcik, coach's son. Cormac Ryan plays under Mike Bray at Notre Dame for that long. They just don't let anybody walk through the doors at Notre Dame. So, and you've got guys like that. And like I said, the maturity. if you look at the guys who left, I'm not knocking them at all, but they were young, and you go back to the old George Allen thing. Don't trust anybody under 30, but and
we're really reaching a lot today.
Oh yeah, you hear coaches too say that the good thing about freshmen is they're freshmen. The bad thing is they're freshmen. So you got that just kind of youth, and you didn't know if it was going to mesh, if it was going to come out or not. You didn't, man. There was just a lot of question marks there. And now you look at what they've got coming in. And these guys have kind of proven it. Now, look, well, Paxson Wojcik has some things to prove, playing at a smaller level. Absolutely. I think they all do. I think Cormac Ryan was probably set a little bit, but, Withers didn't have great numbers at Louisville. But you've got to remember, he was in a bad situation. The Louisville program has been a train wreck. And
they were on teams that won 3-2 games in the ACC last year. So there's a whole lot that they have to prove. So I think that they're captains, but they're not walking in like
they got beat by Bellarmine. I'll give you $5 if you tell me
I'll watch that game.
Bellarmine's in. So Louisville, Kentucky.
It's in Kentucky, right?
Yeah, so it's in Louisville.
It's in Louisville, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, but
I watched that game. That was a mess.
They're playing Division II 3 years ago. So, that they come out of some Louisville was a bad situation. Coming out of Townsend. You're at a smaller school, so they got stuff to prove. I think Harrison Ingram, to me, is the guy that has got a lot to prove. And to me, he could be the wild card here because out of high school, he was a 5-star. When I went to work for you, one of the first guys that I was covering was Harrison Ingram because, Roy Williams was really in hot on him out of Dallas, Texas. And he was like a top 10, top 15 player. He was a 5-star. And so he goes to Stanford. And you look at him at Stanford, he had good 11 to 12 points per game. And you watch, I've talked to people who are in the scouting business, NBA scouts, people who were covered the Pac-12. And I've not heard anybody that did not like him as a player. And I've had some people tell me, say, hey, he could really, really play. He's an excellent passer, great passer, does a lot of different stuff. But the thing with him is he's not has not been, I'm not going to say he's not, he has not been a really strong outside shooter. So if you're looking at him, whether he's playing the 3 or the 4, he's going to have to be able to stretch the floor a little bit. If he makes the outside shot, you got to remember, he was as highly touted out of high school as anybody on this roster. But we've got to fit. We're talking about fit. A lot of people think Caleb Love for Harrison Ingram was a wash. And what I mean by that, 2 5-star guys who are considered by most 2 of the top 5 players in transfer portal this year out of almost 2,000 players. Both of them were top 5. So, Love obviously couldn't make shots in North Carolina. He needed to move. He moved. Hopefully he does well at Arizona. And Harrison Ingram, from what I've seen at Stanford, needed to move. So you've got those 2 guys. So Ingram has got to do, in my opinion, I think he's a better passer. I think his IQ's better, maybe not explosive offensively, but what he needs to do is to do something that Caleb Love could not do at North Carolina for most of the time, and that was make outside shots. I think if he makes the outside shots, he's got everything else. But if he can't make them, then all of a sudden that's a guy that they play off of, and pack it back in the lane. So he's got to be able to make the perimeter shot. Not necessarily the 3-pointer. If he can make the long 2, if he can make the 15 to 18-footer out there.
You got to defend him. If he
gets out,
if he brings a defender out, then that passing ability can be exploited even more. Since you brought up the Caleb for Harrison Ingram swap, if you will, I thought one of the most impressive stats about Harrison Ingram at Stanford, a club that struggled, is that he averaged about 9.2 shots a game. Mm-hmm. And the areas that Caleb hurt Carolina wasn't so much I think the area here at Carolina the most was shot selection. He knew it. It was this thing that he had such a hard time controlling. I had countless number of conversations with him about it after games or whatever, and he knew it. He just couldn't control it. If you go look at Harrison Ingram's stat lines, all of his box scores at Stanford, he didn't have those games where he had to get his and he had to shoot himself into a field and think, oh gosh, the next miss, that means I got 8 straight I'm going to make after that. He never forced it like that, which is why I think he's going to be such a nice complementary piece to this, because he's not going to show up saying, I got to get 15 to 17 shots a night to be who I am. Caleb's going to do that at Arizona. I think that might fit with Arizona, especially with some of the guys that they lost. But I also thought that backfired at Carolina a lot too often. And it got to a point where when he was in one of those stretches, it was a weight on top of everybody on that roster. It weighted them down. I don't think Ingram's going to be that guy. Now, he may miss a lot. And if he ends up shooting 25% from 3, those missed threes will become a weight as well. But he's not going to miss 12 threes in a game like Caleb would, because he's not going to take 12 threes in a game. And I thought that was one of the most fascinating and interesting things about his numbers when you look at last year.
And I'll touch on both subjects there. At Caleb, I don't know that there was ever more of a lightning rod or a maligned player. Well, like you said, at North Carolina, because every bad play, every missed shot put him further in a hole that you just couldn't dig out of. And, we've seen it. A-Rod with the Yankees. Yep. As somebody, when he came in, you look at his numbers and, you look last year at Caleb Love, it was like right there for the leading scorer. When you look at A-Rod, he hit more home runs than Jeter and all that stuff. But, especially you get in the postseason, you watch those, you could watch A-Rod in the playoffs and all that stuff, and he couldn't buy him. He could not put the bat. I mean, it was just, like you say, it was just like that black cloud was following around. Yeah. And that's kind of what it was with Caleb, and you couldn't play your way out. Yeah. And then I think with what it kind of said, and I thought they tried to do better at it, where, as the year went, but it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
It started year out, and watching them just go one-on-one, and it was just the worst offense. Just all it was, guy dribble around, jack one up with 2. I mean, I would rather watch a marathon series of The View than watch North Carolina's offense, early on last year. And I don't think you're going to have that.
You got to be out of your mind on that one.
Well, I might have lied a little bit, but they could not, they just couldn't, no matter what they did, they couldn't make those shots. I look at this year, just with better shooters and with IQ. If nothing else, I think they're going to run better offense. Like I said, it's not going to be 1-on-5 or just, I just dribble around, I curly kneel and dribble around, the circle, and then I don't want to get the missed shot, so I throw it to you 2 seconds left and let you jack 130 because you don't have a choice. So I don't think it's going to be that kind of offense this
year. You are dating yourself a lot. By the way, my dad grew up with Meadowlark Lemon in Wilmington. I had Meadowlark Lemon on my radio show in Wilmington. It was, back in the 40s, right? In Wilmington, North Carolina. And you got guys on one side of the tracks, guys on the other side of the tracks. Amazing story that he told. I told him, I said, you need to write this. He's written all these books and he needs to write about this. But a lot of my dad and his friends would get together with Meadowlark and his friends, and they played baseball on Saturday mornings. And they never told their parents where they were going, because a lot of them wouldn't let them go over there and play. And Meadowlark on my show talked about that. And that's pretty wild stuff. I had him on for an hour and a half one night, which was amazing stuff.
Wow.
So you bring up Curly Neal, I'm thinking of Meadowlark Lemon. That was back when the Globetrotters were the real deal. And North Carolina last year offensively looked too much like the Washington Generals. And maybe this year they'll look like the North Carolina Tar Heels. Hey, you like that one? I had to get that one.
That's good. That's good.
All right. Well, we've done it. We had to talk some basketball. It's been a while since you and I have gotten on here on a pod to talk about the current Tar Heels. We also have a drop coming up Friday about Ian Jackson, so make sure you check that. Also, remember, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of information in the note that Jacob had a little bit earlier in today's show. If you like Carolina's haul from the transfer portal and believe it's better, it should be ranked higher than number 9, go ahead and click like. If you think that what David said about the way they complement might make them much higher than number 9, if you look at that aspect of needs for teams, go ahead and click like. If you're excited about Carolina basketball starting in 2 months, games are in 2 months, go ahead and click like as well. Make sure you go over to our site, TarHeelIllustrated.com. For just $8.33 a month, you can be a Tar Heel insider as well and access all of David's stuff that's not on podcasts. Everything else is premium on the boards, all the recruiting stuff, and it is absolutely worth every penny. And $8.33 is less than a number to drive through now. So it's a drop in the bucket, guys. We have not changed our price in 10 years since I took over. No plans on changing it anytime soon. For David Sisk, I'm AJ. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us.